ladies and gentlemen. I very much welcome this opportunity in this international policy dialogue to contribute a point of view from the European Commission, and also obviously trying to give you some background about the EU development policy reaction as a whole to the subject of this conference. I think the analysis of the problem that we have in front of us and that is at the center of today's conference has clearly shown that there are two avenues which will need to be followed. There is a short-term response strategy which is necessary, but there is also a more medium and more long-term strategy which is necessary, because the problem that we are facing, very rapidly rising food prices, is such that in the meantime everybody assumes that even if the increase of prices may not continue, prices will stay at a high level. There will be a structural shortage of certain foodstuffs, food products, and therefore we basically have to look also at the medium and long-term strategy. And this is obviously where the EU development policy comes in. The EU has a whole range of instruments to intervene in the short term, very important instruments which will certainly be mobilized. But similarly important, and maybe even more important, is the long-term response that we will propose. Now, you will see the Commission adopting a communication in only a few weeks from now, which will be much more detailed and much more clearly identifying the measures than I can tell you today. So I will have to ask you for a little bit of patience to have relatively precise information, a relatively precisely defined response strategy as the Commission will put forward, will present it. We do think that this is very important because the EU is such an important global player that whatever we do will have a huge impact on the problem that we have in front of us. The EU, that means the EC Commission with its instruments and member states, represent more than half of the global development assistance and probably more than even a higher share in humanitarian assistance. That means that our response strategy must have a major impact on the situation that we have in front of us, if it's well designed. Now, I do not want to dwell very long on the short-term response strategy, because that would more be limited to listing instruments and actions which are being prepared now, which are already underway. I would like to say a few more words about the more medium and long-term strategy. In order to give you some of the background, some of the guiding principles within which we will try to incorporate this new problem into our current and classical development assistance, which obviously we also have to continue. The EU is committed in several contexts to poverty alleviation, to contribute to the achievement of all the Millennium Development Goals, and not only to food security, and therefore we have to integrate our response strategy into our larger development strategy. Now, as in the message from the Belgian minister was already laid out, the EU has adopted its overall development strategy, its European consensus, and it is on that that we will build. Now, to come more to the, let's say, the fundamental principles which need to guide us. The EU is committed, as was already said, to implementing the Paris Declaration, and I will try to give you some examples of what this means, and also what it means in terms of the response strategy to the current food crisis. The EU is also committed and is undertaking a major effort since a short time, admittedly, but a major effort To policy coherence for development, I already said the EU is a global player, is not only in development policy a global player, and therefore all our other policies have also a major impact, and therefore the current work which is going on trying to achieve a better policy coherence for development is extremely important in order to make sure that all our policies contribute to our development goals. And I'm sure my colleague from DG Agriculture will say a few words about this when it comes to the more specific case of agricultural policy. But this also will be a guiding principle for development cooperation over the next years. We are also committed in the process leading up to the Doha conference at the end of the year. The EU is committed to scaling up of aid. When it comes to the EC instruments, our limits are set. We have the amounts which we have for the next 6 years, which represent an increase to the previous period. But it's also the EU member states which are committed to scaling up of aid and to achieving the targets which have been set. We also know that we are for the moment not on a very good track. You will have seen the OECD figures published recently. And for the moment there is some matter for concern. Yet, leaders have just confirmed that we are committed to scaling up of our aid. But as I said, we are not aiming only at more aid, but also at delivering aid better, in a better and in a more efficient way. And I would like maybe to use the specific case of the European Development Fund as one of the major funding sources, one of the major financial sources of the EC to address development issues, to demonstrate how we would like to deliver not only more aid but also better aid. Now the EDF is particularly relevant in the specific case also of the problems that we are facing recently, because the EDF is the financing source for the poorest countries of the world. The countries which benefit, the ACP countries which benefit from the European Development Fund, basically represent 2/3 of the countries, of the ACP countries, represent the poorest countries in the world, and therefore the countries which are most stricken by the current crisis. Therefore, EDF in many respects is maybe the most important factor when we look at instruments to address, amongst other objectives, the alleviation of the current crisis. Now the EDF will cover the years 2008 to 2013. It will actually enter into the 10th EDF will enter into force on the 1st of June, which will allow us immediately to mobilize money from the short-term component of EDF. This will be very relevant with respect to today's subject. And therefore we are actually quite happy that after some initial delays, the 10th EDF can now enter into force, and that we can start dispersing funds from the EDF. At the same time, we are right now finalizing the programming of our 6-year perspective, because the EDF is one of those instruments, and this is very important also with respect to the Paris Declaration principles. The EDF is programmed over 6 years. And this is more than most other donors in the area of development assistance can do. Therefore, we are also very well placed to provide structural long-term response strategies to the problems at hand. And again, I think it will be an important test how the EDF will be able to address the problem of rising food prices and the structural deficits in production. Now, in the past, the EDF has concentrated much more on projects and programs, but in line with the principles of the Paris Declaration, the 10th EDF will be very much focused to implement these principles. And I would just like to name some of them. One very important principle will indeed be concentration, focusing on few sectors, and division of labor. As my previous speaker, Mr. Konendetius, has already outlined, both the EC and member states are committed to limit their assistance to very narrowly focused sectors and to concentrate their assistance. And this will mean, and I think we have to take this into account, that not everybody will be working on agriculture. Only certain donors in the EU context will be working on agriculture. And for example, the EDF has, in the EDF programs, 23 of our partner countries have programmed EDF support in the area of agriculture or rural development or food security. So in these countries, the EDF will probably be one of the main players. And it is, I do not want to go into detail, but some of our member states will do the same in other countries who have not selected the EDF as the focal sector for as the focal support for agriculture. But this principle of division of labor will be very important, both because we will avoid that everybody tries to crowd into the same activities with all the problems we had in the past of lacking efficiency, of high transaction costs. No, we will concentrate our instruments. Second, very important means to address and to respect the Paris Declaration is that we will, more than in the past, concentrate on delivering aid through own systems, countries' own systems, through governments. And this means in clear terms that the EDF will provide a very high share of its financial resources through direct budget support, general budget support and sectoral budget support. Again, this has very clear implications on the questions we discussed today, because we will concentrate a large amount of our means on this specific way of delivering aid, and that means automatically not on other ways of delivery of aid. So here also we have to take this into account. This is a basic factor when we look at what we can achieve. And as I already outlined, it is a big difference whether for a country we have selected agriculture as a focal sector and then we will concentrate our means there, or whether we have selected general budget support and then our financial means will go into general budget support and will therefore be linked to specific achievements. The EDF, when delivering budget support, does not deliver budget support against policy trends, against reform promises, but against results, against measurable results. And these indicators are always taken from the MDGs. That means that when we deliver budget support, we will be able to include indicators in the measuring process for budget support, which could include reform measures and progress in specific MDGs, including, for example, food security. For the moment, we are concentrating more on the social MDGs, health and education. But there can be a certain shift when we now tailor the programs in the individual countries. And final principle, which will be guiding implementation of EU aid for the EDF and other instruments, is a very high priority on improving governance. Again, in order to enable our partner countries to address their problems themselves over the long run. So we will actually deliver aid against commitments to improve governance, and we will monitor improvements in governance. And this obviously relates to all sectors across the board. Governance in terms of democracy, in terms of economic governance, which is very important when we wish to deliver budget support. We will have to pay very much attention to economic governance, but also to governance in all other sectors. And again, when we talk about rural development, about agriculture, we will not only be looking at what happens on the ground in terms of projects, but we will be looking as to how these sectors how in these sectors the principles of good governance are applied. So again, there we have an important means to address the situation. Now, when talking about EDF, we talk mainly about Africa, as you know, and Africa is hit in many respects in a different way by the current problem situation. And so we will also try to focus on the specific problems that Africa has at the difference of other developing countries, which are hit in a different way by the current crisis. So we will also not have a one-size-fits-all response. We will use our instruments in a tailored way, and we will be able to address the problems very specifically depending on the situation in countries, the instruments that we have at our disposal. And this will indeed be the main focus on the Commission communication, which I mentioned in the beginning. So in that sense, I hope that I have outlined some of the guiding principles which we have set ourselves and which we will respect, and how we will be trying to fit in a response strategy to the current crisis in the food sector. And for the rest, I will have to refer you to the communication, but as I said, given the importance of the EU, it is important that we define a really thought through and worked out strategy, and you will imagine that this is not being done in a fortnight. So I hope I have given you a first impression, and that today's conference will also provide some important inputs for myself and my colleagues who are assisting in order to still include what we hear in this paper. Thank you very much.